Hey, Kim, and Kim, is Cindy, does she listen in on these? Is she around on this? Okay, so Cindy, just a little housekeeping point. When I go to my calendar invite and go to notes and see my individual panelist invite, I clicked on that and it took me to, the JTAB meeting, you'll be invited in. And I sit there and watch the wheel spin for a minute or two and warm up my coffee. And I came back and I thought to myself, I wonder if there's anything in my email inbox that changes this Zoom panelist login. And sure enough, I go and there's an email this morning at 8:47, which is great. And it gives me, I think, what was a different login, although I am not positive about that. It might have been the same one, and this might have just all been a matter of timing. But I click on that individual invite and it immediately takes me into the Zoom meeting, which leads me to believe there's evidence to suggest I've been given two different Zoom logins, one in the calendar invite, one in a follow-up email. Is there a way to clean that up, go through, get rid of all of, or maybe we've done this and it's too much of a nightmare to, have all these Zoom invites on calendars and whatnot. And I just have to be, and I can do this. I can make the personal adjustment if that's the case, that I just have to look at my email and make sure I'm using that one. But it is sort of an issue. I've run into this before where, you have different invites on different places. But if there's been a decision that we're just going to roll with it that way, that's fine. If there hasn't been a decision and there's a way to go through the calendar and get rid of those, those incorrect Zoom invites, that I would suggest that be done. But again, there's a trade-off there, and I understand that.
No, I send out the invite. I didn't know, because I know before we were having some people having problems the day of. So I do send out, it's actually the same exact URL and invite. I just sent it out again in the morning. If that's causing confusion now, I definitely don't need to send out the reminder one the morning of. I just know a few people were having a hard time finding it previously. That's the reason we started sending it out again on the morning. It is the same URL. Your unique URL is the same. Andy created that, and that just stays through the whole thing. But I know the invite will not let you join until Andy opens it up, and he usually doesn't open it up until right at 9 o'clock. So it will spin until he opens that invite up. So it might have been a coincidence that you did it right when it opened the other one, and that could have been why. But yeah, just let me know what you guys prefer. If you don't want me to send out the reminder the morning of, with the URLs, if that's getting confusing, then I definitely don't need to do that.
I don't think, I think if you're convinced and certain that it's the same invite, that's the same login, then do it the way you're doing it. It was the coincidence, I will say it was a coincidence of timing, because as I left one and went to the other, about 30 seconds elapsed, and that probably put us into the 9 o'clock when Andy opened it up, and it just appeared to me as though there were two different Zoom logins. But thanks, Cindy. Thanks for that explanation. Appreciate it.
Okay. Well, it looks like we have everybody on the line if we're ready to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us for our first JTAB of 2021. Excited that we have a new member. We just want to welcome Roger Armstrong, who's replacing Kim Carson on the board. And with that, I would ask that Cindy please go ahead and call the roll.
Okay, it looks like the advisory board members from Summit County Council, we have Councilman Roger Armstrong, Chris Robinson. From Park City Council, we have Councilman Tim Henney and Steve Joyce. Staff members from Summit County, we have Tom Fisher, Caroline Rodriguez, and Jamie Danzy. Park City staff, we have Matt Diaz, Sarah Pierce, Kim Bilstead, Scott Birmingham, Robbie Smoot, Andy Stevenson, and I didn't get any further. Let's see. It looks I haven't done the public, but we do have, it looks like 10 people over on the public side.
Okay, great. With that, I will go ahead and read the electronic meetings notice. Andy, I don't know if you could display that on the screen for us while I read it. On January 14th, 2021, the mayor issued a written determination that because of a public health emergency, conducting a meeting with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may attend in person. For these reasons, the meeting will be an electronic meeting without an anchor location. Board members will connect electronically. Public comments will be accepted virtually as described below. To comment virtually, use the e-comment or raise your hand on Zoom. Written comments submitted before or during the meeting will be entered into the public record, but will not be read aloud. For more information on participating virtually and to listen live, please go to www.parkcity.org. And I do not believe that we received any public comment to date before the meeting. Is that accurate, Andy?
I did not receive any comments.
Okay, great. Is there anyone here today that would like to address the JTAB for items that are not on the agenda?
And just as a reminder, raise your hand on Zoom and I'll give you access to speak.
Okay, it appears we don't have anyone raising their hand. Is that accurate, Andy?
Yep.
Okay, we'll go on, move along then. We do not have any consent items on today's agenda. So we'll go ahead and move on to the discussion items. Our first item is consideration to approve the JTAB meeting minutes from December 15th, 2020. Are there any changes to those meeting minutes?
I move approval.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed?
I will abstain from the vote since I didn't participate in the meeting.
Okay, great, thank you. Go ahead and get those entered into the record then. And our next item is our regional planning transition update from Caroline. Are you ready, Caroline?
Yep, good morning. Is everyone else hearing an echo or is it just me? I'm just wondering.
I've got it too.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
actually not when you and Tim speak, but when Andy and I were speaking, it sounded like Darth Maul.
All right, well, I don't need any further annoyances in my voice. It's already kind of grating. I understand that. So I'm glad I'm not echoing. So I want to update the group on 3 different items today. The first is the NEPA process on the bus rapid transit on 224. So as you know, we have contracted and started the NEPA process, which is the environmental analysis to move the both side running bus rapid transit forward. We are just in the very early stages of that, and we have drafted what are called agency letters to send out to any agency that is potentially impacted by the bus rapid transit. And that goes, water districts, rec districts, Bureau of Indian Affairs. I mean, it runs the gamut for which agencies could be impacted. And those letters come directly from FTA. So we have drafted the letters and shared them with our FTA, Federal Transit Administration region, and they will be going out shortly. We just have a slight pause in the process to wrap up some discussion items with UDOT's environmental, and then we'll continue forward. But so far, month 1, we're still on schedule, and we hope the process will take about a year. Any questions on the environmental for the bus rapid transit? Okay. Second project is the Kimball area plan that's being conducted by UDOT in partnership with Park City and Summit County. As most of you are aware, we just had a county council discussion about the level 2 screening on the alternatives. The public survey is still open. We have over 600 responses on that, and the survey will close February 12th, and then we will wrap up the level 2 alternative screening and get into some micro modeling, and then by March we should have a draft area plan for everyone to review and comment on. Do I have any questions or comments on that?
I'd be curious to know if our friends in Park City have had a chance to review that and weigh in.
I'll jump in. I did read through the whole document. Being a planning commission guy, it's like, oh, this is interesting. And submitted my responses on the survey. And for me, the interesting thing was, I guess, quick summary. Really bothered by the thing that went through the conservation easement. To me, that was a quick no start. Option 4, where it was kind of the collection of little hodgepodge things. To me, that felt like it was just treading water. It's like every time you do one of these things, maybe you are lucky and keep up with growth, and that's about it. And some of the things didn't even make sense to me, like adding yet another light in that series of lights going down the road. So I was a big proponent of kind of go big or go home, and focused on option 3, which I think was consistent with what the county council, at least the majority of county council, is pushing for. To me, that's the only one that really makes a substantive difference. You got to get those elevation changes between the Park City to I-80 traffic and the surprising amount of Kimball Junction traffic, or it's just not worth it.
Thanks, Steve. I think that's a pretty good summary.
And I'll agree with Steve's assessment.
Thank you.
It sounded like this isn't anywhere in the UDOT like 5-year plan. So I always get confused when we start working on these. It feels like there's so much detail going on that it would seem like something fairly imminent. But it sounds like there's no funding for this, and so this would start to put it into the capital program for some number of years down the road, but who knows how long. I mean, obviously something like the Olympics could make more of a difference, but without that, it sounds like this would be a kind of a 5 to 10 year thing, maybe. Is that fair?
I'd say that's completely realistic, and probably depends more on local money contribution, and landowner contribution, as opposed to really UDOT's timeline. I mean, if it was measured up against anything on the Wasatch Front, it wouldn't make their timeline anytime quick. So it's really up to us.
Is that a statement of kind of the failure of intersections and the traffic volume affected and that kind of thing? Is it, or something else?
It's more of a statement of just comparison of problems on highways in the I-15 corridor as opposed to in the rural areas.
Probably a little more complicated than that. We met with Carlos Becerra when we were doing the Kimball Junction plan and asked him what it would take to get on the STIP and if there's any way to influence positioning on the STIP. And he said that it's really about a number of things. One is, do you have a plan? And is it an executable plan? And I think this is the first step toward that. Getting buy-in from UDOT. They're the ones kind of coming up with these alternatives in collaboration with Caroline. And then we're selecting out of those recommendations or possibilities. We're sort of indicating our priorities. Beyond that, it's a matter of money. So the cost is what the cost is, but they want to know that, and you guys had to run into this on the 248 discussions, they want to know that the jurisdiction is going to have some skin in the game. So they don't want to be the only providers of money. You can reach out for FDA money, state money, local money, but they want to know that there's collaboration on the financing, according to him, at some level. And then the third level is jurisdictional buy-in and public buy-in. So they want to know that what they don't want to do is tee something up and have Park City or Wasatch County or somebody else. Wasatch County may be a little bit removed here, but they don't want other jurisdictions coming in and saying, we can't support that and actively advocating against it. So they won't buy in. By the same token, they don't want the public to come out with torches and pitchforks after this incredibly long planning process and a commitment to say no. And if you can line all of those factors up, and as you pointed out, the Olympics is a wild card that could influence things as well. But once all, and that, theoretically could involve even broader jurisdictional support for the Olympics on a planning basis. If you can make all that magic happen, then you can actually get on the STIP and get on the STIP earlier. They plan about 10 years out, according to him. So Caroline, I think, has said kind of our best case scenario here, if everything lined up perfectly, might be 5 years. So year 5 to 10 is probably not bad.
I think the Olympics provide that magic in the wild card, Roger, and it kind of lines up timing wise with a shovel in the ground 5 years from now, 6 years from now for completion, 9 years from now, and I keep hearing that there's going to be a determination on the Olympics next year. And I've been hearing that for 3 years, but I do get the sense that about sometime in 2022, they are going to, in fact, make the decision. And it'll be either be 30-30 or 30-34. And as you point out, that is still a wild card. But I think a lot more of our big project planning is going to start to ground in the Olympics, and having all those things you just detailed lined out and ready to go is going to be really important and put us in a great position. So I think that wild card is going to become less of a wild card and more of a catalyst.
Okay. Okay, I'll continue. So the last project I want to update the group on is the transition for the regional transit district. And I'm almost scared to say this, but we're on schedule to the week. So we had a series of 7 tasks that we were completing in getting ready for launch in July. We wanted to have all 7 of those tasks completed by April 1st so that we could really get into, building up to the launch and be ready for that. We have completed the goals and objectives and the market and route analysis, and we are working now on the alternatives analysis. And then once that's finalized, we will provide a detailed service plan. The alternatives analysis and the service plan are going through almost 4 levels of review. And that first line is review with staff. And by staff, I mean both regional transit and Park City transit staff, because we really want to make sure that the transition is as seamless as possible for all of our customers. And I know that's a priority for Kim as well. So we've already briefed Park City transit staff on what we're thinking in terms of service design. And I've also briefed all of our JTAB members. So then we have this second level of review that is the Regional Transit Board of Trustees that have seen the draft service plan. We are making some tweaks based on all the feedback we've gathered from the Board of Trustees and you all. And then a draft service plan will go to our advisory committee, which is now made up of about 35 individuals from Summit County and Wasatch County. And then finally, we will go to the public for comment on a draft service plan. And that will occur towards the end of February, and we'll have a finalized plan in March. And as I said, as of right now, we are on schedule. And I can take any questions.
Caroline, have you given to Park City, our friends here on the call, task memo 3 from Via?
I have given it to Kim. I'm not sure if the elected JTAB members received it, but I am happy. Okay, I'm happy to share that with you, and I will send that today.
I
And
think
that's a market and route analysis. So it has a lot of insight, I think.
that'd be great to hear their feedback on it, and I think it's pretty well done document.
Sure, I'll share it today.
Thank you.
Okay. If that's everything for that portion of the agenda, I'll go ahead and do the operational update for Park City. And Andy, if you would just bring up the PowerPoint, please.
Sorry, the JTAB controls are blocking sharing the screen. Just 1 second.
Okay. Okay, go ahead and go to the first slide, please. Some of you, I know, are aware that the federal government has put out a mask mandate for all public transit. Well, you know, Summit County has had the mandate all along. This is something new from the federal government, so they are asking that we communicate this to our patrons, and so we will be tweaking some of our signage on the bus. This is just an example here of what the feds have provided that we could use as signage, but we are trying to just incorporate it into our existing signage. We feel that's a little bit more clear. So it is actually, you know, against federal law if you're not wearing a mask on public transit. Hoping that is the final straw to helping everybody ensure compliance, but we'll make sure that we communicate that.
Kim, are we having any problems on the buses with people not wearing masks?
We do get some complaints about that, and there has been some altercations with operators over that when they try to enforce it. And, you know, I think the majority of people are wearing them, but we do see some folks that, you know, take it off their nose, or they're eating on the bus, which they're not supposed to do. And that upsets others, understandably. It's just a very difficult situation. We don't want to put the operator at risk. So we just need everybody to do their part to be compliant.
So when there's those obstacles where people are basically pushing back, how are those getting resolved? And has it become a real problem? Has it become physical? Have we had to use police or anything like that? Or
we have not had to use the police yet. We have had to have transit supervisors respond to a couple incidents on the bus. It has not become physical, but there has been some aggressive language used towards the operators. And mainly what I see is that the complaints come in after the fact from riders. They're just, you know, very upset. They understand the operator can't necessarily see it, but they're still upset that, you know, the compliance isn't there, and just ask that we do more to remind people. So we continue to try to step up those efforts.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next slide. So some good news. There is some new additional funding for public transit from the FTA. They're calling it the Coronavirus Relief and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act, or CRRSA. And what it entails is basically $14 billion that is available to assist public transit. And what that means for us is 4.9 million will go to UDOT for rural agencies, and then UDOT will decide how to divvy that up. UDOT is still trying to understand how this funding will work. I was on an APTA call a few weeks ago where it was noted that a lot of the fellow transit agencies had heard that there's going to be a 75% cap on the funding an agency could receive between the initial CARES funds and the CRRSA funds. And so with the CARES funds, they based it on our 2018 budget, which was $12 million, and divvied out our, you know, allotment accordingly. And we've already received 6 million to date, so essentially 50% of that year's budget. So even if, you know, there's 4.9 million available to UDOT, and typically Park City gets a generous amount of that. If that cap is actually active, that could restrict what we're able to obtain from that. Plus, there's still additional CARES funding left. So UDOT's trying to figure that out. They weren't really aware of that and didn't have any information to share at the time. So they're going to follow up with us on that. Okay, any questions on the funding? Okay, you can go on the next slide, please. Just want to say thank you to Summit County for prioritizing our transit drivers with the COVID vaccinations. It has been well received amongst the operators. They're very appreciative. They feel safer doing their job. Of course, it was not mandated for everybody. It was a personal choice, but they truly feel that they're valued by the county and the city, and I can't express enough the gratitude that is there. So I just want to make sure everybody knew that the efforts have not gone unnoticed. In fact, it's actually helped us save some folks that were going to resign because they were fearing for their health. So I think this is, great that we were able to do that, and not every agency is. So thank you. Okay, next slide. So we are continuing to do our push to remind people of our health and safety seal that we're participating in with APTA and our standards. And so we did have an ad in the Park Record this last Saturday. And then we've also been putting pushes out on our Facebook and Twitter. So this is just an example of the ad that we ran last weekend to try to get people to continue to do their part to keep us all safe.
And I hate to bring this up because we talk about it all the time, but when you're doing the things at least online, are they being done in Spanish as well?
I believe so. Andy, you can comment to that.
Yeah, so unless it's like an emergency like notice that we need to push out and we don't have a staff member or are able to translate it right away, we do push everything else in English and Spanish.
Good, thank you. Good answer.
Okay.
My answer was going to be sí, señor.
We'll call you up for your help. All right, and that's all I had. Are there any questions for me at this time? Okay.
Kim, would you mind sending me a copy of that? My fingers aren't as fast as they once were, just so I can have ease of reference on it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You bet. All right. Well, then I guess we're back to Caroline for the county operational update.
Jamie's going to give the update and she's going to share her screen.
Okay.
But you have to unmute.
Here we go. I'm just gonna get the slideshow started and then we'll start sharing. So I don't know if this is the order on the agenda that we start with Park City. Is that on the agenda order?
It's not, but it's fine.
Okay, so we'll start here if you guys are okay, or we can jump down to ridership. So I know that this is a continuation of our conversation from December JTAB meeting, I believe, to go over a little bit of the history with Park City Connect, the PCSLC Connect. So we're jumping right into numbers with these slides, but there's a little bit of history in your JTAB packet. So 10 years this fall, which is pretty incredible. And I think all in all, it's been, I'm going to go to this slide right here. It's been pretty consistent, gradually increasing until, of course, last year when everything changed. But it seems like it's pretty much a staple of the county and city service. Excuse me. Caroline and I are going to team up if you have any specific questions on some of the AMT and the funding, but we can sit here on this slide for a minute and I'll see if there are any questions. These highlighted cells, 2014, this is when the Route 901 began, November of 2014, and it's been operating from Meadowbrook Track Station into the county. Since then, it started at just one trip each direction, and now it's up to 4 on weekends and 2 on weekdays. So it has doubled. And then if we move to 2017, this November 2018 should actually be 2017. This is the year we started using Kimball Junction Transit Center. That's when all service stopped going to Deer Valley. And since then, it's been pretty consistent over the last 4 years, the number of trips and then ending at Kimball Junction Transit Center. So we can update this, but just pretend that 2017 November is orange. So this is sort of, there's too many numbers. Do you like the other slide where it has cost per passenger, or do you guys want to sit here for a minute?
Let's stay here for a minute.
Okay.
How
So
does well, go ahead, Jamie.
Before, we don't have all the information to fill this in yet. We're still collaborating with UTA to fill in some of this, but we will provide it as we get it. I just want to preface that. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was around when we signed this deal in 2011, and as you can see, it's nearly doubled in cost as far as the city and county's contributions, and ridership is reflected, well, has increased some, although it's had some down years. Should we do a gut check on whether this is configured right and the best place to spend this kind of money in the overall transit scheme? I know it's high priority, and that probably is heresy to even breathe or whisper, but it seems inflationary and pricey. I'd also be curious to know if we could have VIA look at it and do their analysis like they've done in this task memo 3. Give us opinions on how it's working and how it might be better.
As far as VIA goes, it's just, there are some service characteristics with this, with the size of coaches. I know that Park City has just upgraded some of the vehicles to electric bus, so Kim might want to jump in on this. We have Wi-Fi. So there are some conveniences that passengers have come to really like. That would be one thing to consider. As far as the cost with the number of trips and the revenue with passengers, there's always a way we could look at creating more of a revenue source to decrease the operational deficit. I know that we're in talks with UTA pretty soon to sort of look at some of the contract items. There might be some room to reduce it, but it's an expensive service.
When I was in 2011, when we were looking at this, the number in my head, I thought that we were capped out at was 185,000. Obviously, that's not from each city and county partner, with UDOT picking up the slack, or UTA picking up the slack. Maybe that's just bad memory on my part, but it's now grown to over 300,000. 2020 is an anomaly year, perhaps, so should rule it out, but it's a sizable contribution.
Yeah.
Maybe the cost per rider, when you get to your next slide, will say that's terrific, and don't fuss with it.
Let me ask you a couple of questions on why there seems to be a spike of ridership in 2019. Do we know why?
Off the top of my head, I don't. Cam or Caroline, do you guys remember anything extraordinary last year?
I don't.
The only guess I would have would be anecdotal. I don't have data to prove this, but I know that the reliability of the connection when the PCSLC Connect got to the Kimball Junction Transit Center, our feedback from resort employees said that reliability improved in 2019. So anecdotally, that would be my guess. Again, I don't have data to prove that.
And
people
Chris,
are comfortable using it.
Okay, it'd be interesting to try and drill down on that. If we did something right or better that caused it, let's do that again. Or enhance that. If it was just a random change because it was a random change, may have been. I mean, 2019 was such. Just trying to see. I don't really see. We don't track the monthly numbers. If we have, that was a really impressive economic year for the county, and I don't know if that's an increased number of jobs overall because of development and the resorts being so occupied full time and other wins, but it's probably good to know that. And Chris, to your point, we can slice this data a number of ways, but on probably an oversimplified basis, we're talking about something close to 1,000 cars a month. Is that right? If we've got, no, 1,000 cars a week, if we've got 54,000 rides, I don't know if that's evenly spaced or what that looks like, but that may be, if that's not too oversimplified, that could be meaningful. 1,000 cars off the roads is, you know, a good get.
I will just say, I think it's boarding, so it would be maybe half that for AM and PM riders.
I think though that, is the terminus now at Kimball?
Yes.
So it's 1,000 cars off the road going through that short stretch of 224 to the transit. I'm just wondering.
Well, no, I don't think that's right. I think it's taking cars off that critical area.
Well,
Terminus is a single bus going into the transit center rather than 500 cars.
Is 500 cars what period of day?
500 boardings per week if I'm making it by Rogers oversimplification. If we've got 54,000 boardings a year, and you just divide that up evenly, that's little in 2019. And if the reason for that spike is in boardings is that we had, if you go back to the prior slide, numbers are there at the bottom. You see that 54 in 19. Otherwise, it's kind of in the mid 40s, it's a little less than 1,000, so a little less than 500.
Then you divide that in half because that's boarding is each way.
Yeah, so you come up with a little less than 500 cars a week.
Divide that in half.
Divide that by 7.
Give a little bump to the winter because we usually have a lot more in winter.
Well, the people that ride it presumably have to take it home, right?
Yeah, I think he already did.
Those are the
He
boardings.
already divided it to get from 1,000 to 500. That was
okay.
the divide by 2.
Okay, yeah, so I mean, I've been a fan of a connection for a long time. I'm just saying, I think that the COVID has allowed us to question a lot of our assumptions. And I think it'd be good to have a fresh set of eyes. And I've so far been impressed with Via's discernment to look and see if there's a way to tweak any of this or, you know, bang for the buck, is this the best place? And it may be that we need to play a little tougher with our partners at UTA.
Amy or Kim, what's the fare that the riders pay? Isn't it $4.50 or something, or $3.50? I forget what it is.
It just went to $5.
$5, okay.
That-
So they're paying $5. We're subsidizing the rest, and you know, we get an occasional. I had one, I don't know, last week about a rider who was wondering if we could create a voucher system to make it a free ride, and I informed that individual that it was already heavily subsidized. So they don't know that. You know, most of the riders apparently don't seem to know that. Another thing to point out here, I think. I'm not sure when it changed. Kim, you might be able to help me, but I don't know that you were even part of transit at the time. But we used to run this bus all the way up to Snow Park, Deer Valley, I think. And we changed that to the Kimball Junction Transit Center. That may have happened in 2018. And so Roger, to your point of looking for things that we've done to enhance, for some reason, you know, taking it out of coming all the way into Park City and putting it out to Kimball Junction, we heard some resistance from riders about that. But I think there might be a correlation from going from 43,000 to 47,000 in 2018 to that change. And then the 2019, I'm going to say, has a correlation, and this is anecdotal, as Caroline said, we don't really have data, but we put a big push on with the employers to incentivize riding, you know, transit, and irrespective of whether it was down to Salt Lake or transit, within the county or transit within Park City. And I do believe that there's been some payoff and some benefit to their efforts. And if we were going to look for a way to reduce our subsidies, I'm not sure it's UTA, although it might be. We did have an agreement with UTA, which is their subsidy went away first once the revenues came into play, to the point where we had reduced the overall subsidy to a certain level. They were the ones that were first let off the hook, and we, the county and the city, continued to provide that subsidy. So there might be a discussion to be had there, but I continue to believe the discussion is with our big trip generators and our employers, and getting them to continue to use things like Ecker Hill, continuing to focus on, when we get it built, the Quinn's Park and Ride, and continuing to get their employees and even their guests to use satellite parking and transit. And this is an indication of how that can be effective. And I think we've seen some benefit in the data, in the numbers related to that. So I would be inclined to have discussions with, Vail and with Deer Valley about whether or not there's some way for them to provide additional funding to offset this, if this is something that we really want to do. We've had this discussion periodically, time to time, about whether this is worthwhile, whether this is something we want to continue to do, whether we're getting enough bang for the buck. And the JTAB discussion has in the past resulted in an affirmative vote and direction. We don't authorize things, but we give direction. And in the past, I think the last one we did was 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. The COVID thing has kind of created a disruption in my timeline. And it was affirmed. And we do that periodically, and we have periodically affirmed this particular subsidy and this particular route. But, Chris, you're right. We can always look at things and see if we want to make adjustments. But I think the big question that you're asking is, are we getting enough bang for the buck? And if we can say yes or no, that leads us to next steps in the path that we want to pursue.
Well, following up on that, I'm with you, Tim. I don't remember when we made the change. 2000. When did we start the white?
2017, 18, 17.
July 2017. I'm sorry, June.
And I believe that I think part of that deal, once the white started, part of the deal or the discussion that was relayed to the county council was that rather than having Caroline, I mentioned this recently to you and you had an explanation for it, but rather than having the PC to SLC bus run all the way into Park City, there would be a couple of benefits of having it terminate at Kimball Junction. One was that theoretically it could result in an additional run. And the second was that there would be a cost savings by not running all the way in and back. Just operationally, there would be a reduction. When I look at the numbers, the numbers that we pay just have steadily increased. I'm not seeing the cost reduction to the county and the city by shortening the routes. So I'm not sure whether that just didn't happen or didn't pay off. And Caroline, I think you said that while there may have been some thought that there might be an additional run, it wasn't able to happen or didn't materialize for whatever reason.
And UTA did tell us before we made the change that they did the math and there would be no cost savings.
Okay. Actually, the cost increase year over year. The steady march upward.
The one thing that I would offer, just from Chris saying take a look at it, is the thing that surprises me is we've basically added routes and we've added frequency, and we really haven't added nearly a proportionate amount of riders. So my question is, if we go all the way back to 2013 and we had limited routes per day, limited choices between the 901, 902, whatever, it seems like as we've added and added, we're getting marginal improvements. So I would throw out just one more possibility in here that says, if we could go back to doing a small number of very select routes that seem to get us the most bang for the buck. Can we spend half as much and get back to, you know, the 47,000 riders? It just seems like we must be running lighter buses now to be running more of them without that many more riders on it.
All good points.
Caroline, do you or Kim have any thoughts about the value and utility of this?
From my perspective, I think it is a valuable service. I mean, right now, you know, is not a good time, obviously, for any ridership, but I think also something that's really important to remember is that we have entered into, the city has entered into an interlocal agreement with UTA to purchase 4 electric buses. So, you know, if we were to back out of this service, it's not as simple as maybe it was before that agreement was entered into. So we're kind of well down the road to continuing this partnership.
How does that, how, you know, going back up, it looked to me like in scanning the memo that Caroline and Jamie prepared, that UTA's contribution was the vehicles and customer service and things like that. How do the new buses that you just mentioned that Park City Transit has purchased fit into all of this cost-wise? Who?
Yeah, I'll need Caroline's help on this one because I was not here for a lot of this, but you know, when I did arrive about 1.5 years ago, this agreement was already in the works to purchase the buses. So yes, UTA did provide the buses initially. I've been told that the plan was always Park City would provide them, but perhaps wasn't able to in the beginning. And with some of the funding that's been received, we're now able to, and that's why the agreement was entered into. But Caroline probably has some more detail. No, okay, sorry.
I will just say that I do agree with Kim that this is a valuable service. I'm not saying there potentially could be tweaks to how it's financed and you know, how the operational deficit is paid, but it is a valuable service. And then Jamie, can you go to the next slide, please? So, you know, if you look at the cost per trip or cost per boarding, it's not off the charts at all. So, you know, it's actually pretty competitive for the service that it is. So while I think the service is valuable and also we could make a case that it's productive, perhaps there's something we can look at in the contract that makes it more financially viable for us as opposed to UTA.
That's good. I suspect that the periodic reviews will probably result in the same conclusion to which I will subscribe, that it continue, namely. But I think it's good to have a periodic look-see under the hood and see if it's really the best play. It's just growing, you know. Is it in 5 years going to be $1 million split between both of them?
I think another thing to consider is that, you know, we have to internally totally support the look at it. That's exactly what this body should be doing. But the whole effect of the pandemic on everything, including transit ridership, we're going to have to figure out internally what is our tolerance for letting the system grow back, and whether it does grow back, because we're going to have to evaluate that on a regular basis.
I think that's a great point. The other thing I wanted to ask was, while we show maybe a high water mark of 54,000 boardings, how many boardings is possible total if the buses were full? I mean, what is the capacity if every trip were, every last seat were full on every last trip? What percent does 54,000 represent? I've ridden the route once and I was one of 3 people on it. And
I think-
it took me quite a while by the time I meandered from, I started at the UTA facility that's like on 3rd or 4th west or 6th west, and kind of their main hub, and it was quite a journey. I got a lot of work done. I can work anywhere. But
Do you have a snack?
The
Can
calculator.
I
can I
did
just
not
ask
have-
about the numbers real quick? Because I'm seeing the math confuses me. It says cost per passenger by season, and we're looking at kind of the $6 to $7. So if I just round up for $7, just for easy numbers, if I multiply 7 times 54,000, then I get $378,000. And yet on the screen before, we said it was costing us 700,000.
So that might be per entity, not counting UTA's contribution. I don't know. That's the numbers. If it's costing us in 2019, it cost us each 334,000.
Well, it's interesting. That cost is actually a lot less than the winter season. It's down in the 5s
But
and 6s.
is that cost to us, each of us? Is it cost to the whole system shared among 3 entities?
So Caroline Clickman, I think that this is per entity, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So it's not, we say it's a cheap ride, but there's 3 parties contributing. 4 parties. There's the passenger that's paying some of it, and then UTA and ostensibly is paying some, and then each of us are paying the $5 to $7.
So
Yeah,
sorry,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
Well, we'll have to check with UTA, but because these numbers came from them, but I think what we're seeing is that the cost per passenger on slide 2, and I don't know, because I haven't done the math on my calculator, but I think the cost per passenger is calculated after the fare revenue.
So Caroline, what would this look like if we're really going to evaluate the service? Assuming it's $20 or $25 fully loaded passenger at Summit County Park City UTA to move a single passenger. To Chris's point about having VIA take a look at it, does a van pool make more sense than a bus once or twice a day? That can crawl around. Can you run 2 or 3 vans for the same price?
I don't know. I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
And does that increase convenience and therefore increase ridership and get more people to use it?
It doesn't increase convenience.
The thing I want to reiterate, I said a minute ago, I have no way of knowing what % capacity utilization any of these stats have. My anecdotal observation of the routes that I'm around, which albeit are some of the weaker ones, the buses are seldom very full. If I see empty buses, I'm referring to, around the 8 Brown route, which is close to my home. See, but I'm not out enough to. It's not a representative observation, but I never know if we moved 54,000 people in 2019, what was the capacity had it been full? Could it have been 1 million people, or I don't know. I mean, we're running big vehicles up and down the roads, and with no metric on how many, what % on average are the seats full. And that gets to, are we getting good bang for our buck? If the seats were fuller, I'm just saying, let's say that 25% of the seats are full, then is there a way to do a smaller bus? Or if you could entice more ridership, then our costs go way down.
There were pre-COVID some very, very full trips. We did an analysis when we were looking at how to cut service on which trips were most productive. And before March of last year, some were 2/3 to almost 100% full. And then some were not as full, but it's just a matter of timing them. So you have a reverse trip down. So some are just by nature
Is,
empty.
is it difficult to come up with, some slides that would compare these numbers to what the total capacity would be?
No, I don't think so. And if you wanted to do just like a fun, I don't have my calculator up, but you can do 53 people per trip and it's 16 trips per day. So that would be 100% capacity. Just
So it's 53 times
16 trips per day on just the Route 902. I'm just thinking of 902 right now because it runs
and how many days a year is that?
every single day. That's year round.
Caroline, in my COVID brain fog, I seem to recall when we had our conversation with VIA, I think I asked about PC to SLC and value, but we didn't dig very deep. And I think they confirmed that it was valuable. That was the extent of the whole discussion, I think.
If that were the case, it would be 17.5% utilization. 309,000 potential trips. And that's using the 54,000. I don't know, maybe that's
every day.
that might be equivalent to 3% unemployment, full employment.
I think the answer is we
Sorry,
don't really know. We'll have to come back. We'll have to come back next JTAB meeting for a deeper analysis to answer these questions.
Is it outside of VIA's scope?
Yeah, it is.
It is. Okay.
Just a question, is there anything coming up that is like a threshold of timing that would say, hey, if you're going to change this route in any way, you need to do it by, date X kind of thing? The only thing I can think of is that we ordered buses. I mean, is there anything else like that of, contractual thresholds with UTA or something like that, that you go, God, get it done by this point or don't do it?
Jamie probably has more insight into this, but yeah, they have deadlines because I think the operators bid their work and they have certain deadlines they have to meet before they even consider changing service, because it does go to their board. Did I describe that correctly, Jamie?
Mm-hmm. But you would have about a 4-month window, depending on what the contract is. But I think that's easy.
Does it have anniversaries that come up that would be where it needs to, be renewed or renegotiated? Or
does what? Sorry, I didn't hear your
does
question.
the agreement with UTA have anniversaries that are potential opportunities to make adjustments or renegotiate?
Actually, we need to renegotiate the contract this year because it's outdated. And especially with the new vehicles and the new transit district. We have anticipated since last year that 2021 would be the year we not renegotiate, but revise the contract. I don't know that UTA had considered renegotiating the terms.
Has it expired on its terms? We've just been going month to month.
I don't know. Let me check really quick.
I don't think it has an expiration. It just continues until anyone wants to make a change.
Okay.
That's the way it's written now.
We probably flogged this all the way down to the ground and we're stepping on it now. Who do you want to take a look at it? Let's move on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest, since we're in a year that we anticipate talking to UTA about it anyway, we line up some of these questions for a further month so that staff knows kind of where the JTAB wants them to go with negotiation.
Well, and can I ask one other one that we kind of, I hate to pile onto this, but to me, it's the more important thing given the current transition to the regional transit district, is a question of how is this thing owned and managed? You know, do you guys own it because you have the regional transit board? Do we own it because we've kind of owned the relationship up until this point? You know, if it's really running to Kimball Junction and stopping, does it make more sense that it's you know, it's really owned and run by the regional transit board because it doesn't even get into Park City anymore, even though it's a critical part to us? And if so, whatever the answer to that is, how does that affect the plan for how it gets paid for? And so to me, I'll leave it to Caroline and Kim and Jamie and stuff to go off and work on, are we doing the right number of routes? Are we doing it with the right size buses and all that kind of stuff? I think there's a more of a Tim, Chris, Rogers, Steve discussion with advice from staff that says, all right, we're going to start carving things up here. How does this fit into it and how does it get paid for? Because it could easily be fundamentally different than it is today.
I appreciate that question. And you know me, Steve, I'd prefer to keep it completely ambiguous forever so that we never know.
I question that that's really what you want to do, Mr. Manager.
You know, I don't think we can, this is not one of those things that we can divorce ourselves from both participating in just because it has such an impact on us. But this is, it seems on its surface to have a very regional nexus, which could point it in a direction, but that is definitely a policy call.
So let me just throw this out, and I don't want to sidetrack us too much, but we're not really going to get into too much of it in this meeting. There's a whole string of things to me that are interconnected on kind of how does stuff get paid for? And it really gets to the idea of how does regional stuff get paid for? And what does it mean if regional stuff goes into Park City or not? And then certainly everything affects Park City, but that's kind of a weird line to draw. And then you get back to the one that I've asked for before, is we start really looking at how the quarter tax increments are going to get divided up. And do we, you know, there's ones that we can fall back and split. There's ones that the county owns right now, and a question of how that gets distributed. I think all of that ties together, because if you turn around, you know, one answer is we save a larger chunk of money out of all of that for regional transit, but then regional transit pays for this bus. The alternative is, no, we're really splitting lots of the money and then we both throw into the bucket to pay for this. I don't know how to separate. I mean, certainly there's a administrative ownership kind of thing of who owns the contract with UTA and the buses and all that kind of thing. But there's the bigger one to me is, we've got a bunch of stuff that we're still doing jointly. And if it falls into your regional transit district, then we essentially have no say, no board membership, no anything. So it gets kind of weird for us as to, you know, how are we throwing in money if we don't have any say in what the board decides and that kind of thing. So that's the big scary one for me out of all of this. I trust that staff will take care of everything else.
Well, didn't we have on our agenda to talk about the additional mass transit taxes today? We decided to punt those to next month. Is that the percent you?
No, I think we need to sit down and actually there's 5 of them, and you know, one of them actually gets subdivided into little pieces, and you know, we've kind of had a whole bunch of things that we've done, which are we jointly decide how this quarter is going to get spent, and we jointly decide how this other quarter is going to get spent. And but I think as we go to this regional transit world, I don't think those rules are going to make sense as much anymore. So there's some, like the first quarter, that we basically just, it already gets split up and handed out by wherever the sales tax was done. So it's, you know, it's, that one's easy. It's already done. It's worked that way for years. We don't have to touch it. There's several of the other ones I think we really need to talk about. And I don't know how to separate them from one to the other, because I think as soon as you make a decision of, do you split one? Do you keep spending jointly? How do you manage that? Then it has an effect on the next one down the line. So I really think, and I think this is really policy more than just a simple implementation. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of discussion about how do the expenses pile into it or not. But I think this really needs to be you and Roger and me and Tim with maybe, Matt or Sarah and Tom, and just sit down and start going through this, because it's tens of millions of dollars we're talking about carving up between transit and transportation and capital and that kind of thing. And I can't imagine it's going to look that close to what we've been doing. Can't imagine that's what it's going to end up looking like down the road.
Well, are you suggesting that we do that outside of JTAB because it has the same parties that you listed?
Yeah, I think
others.
kind of like
others.
Yeah, I think since it's really very much the beginnings of the discussion, at least, are very much about policy, and I think there's going to be some interesting things about, where we're looking to take our transit district and stuff like that. I would say a much smaller group, kind of like we've done with a couple of the other issues, and just try to at least get a straw man in place, and then it can be, it can become a JTAB thing. But I think where we've done things in the past with the JTAB team, but not 25 people, it's 6.
When would you guys like to do that? I think it's a good idea. I mean, we've got to start dealing with some of these policy issues. Tom,
Yeah,
when would you recommend? It sounds like, Roger, you okay with having such a meeting?
I don't have a problem with it. I think we should probably discuss it offline and find out where we are in that overall plan that Caroline mentioned earlier, so that we're not doing it, without, I'd like to be able to come in with some kind of a proposal and not just a blank slate, because I think some of that has been cooking, but I don't think anything is served up yet. I mean, we're still trying to figure out where the pieces fit together and how they fit together in that plan that Caroline described. So having a conversation before we have a little bit more solidified is going to be tougher. I don't think, Caroline said that the one plan of which, Chris, you recommended sending copies today, that's going to be starting to get pretty solid by March. So that's 2.5 weeks away, ish, 3 weeks away, whatever that is, sometime in March. So yeah, I think that it makes sense. We've got to figure out, I think, how we start moving the overall proposal process together. This is one link in that chain, but we're going to have to start having those discussions. So if one is more sensitive than another, and you want to kind of do that in a quiet, dark environment, you can do that.
Well, Jerry did a nice job for us, and I don't know if you guys have something similar, that he just had to do kind of a C-spot run for Tim and I on, here are the 5 tax quarters, here's how they get appropriated today. And it made it really clear kind of, where do we split, where do we, already get things divided up by the state taxes, and then where are the kind of questionable things as we go forward for what becomes regional, what gets split that's not today, and that kind of thing. So I think if you don't have something similar to that, that would be, I think we probably need to clean it up, because it's written from a very Park City view of the world, is, what is us, what do we get kind of thing. And it, but it's, I think that would be a start. And then I think where we're kind of filling in is like what Caroline was working on for one of the quarters, is so everybody gets a better understanding of where has the money gone, how much is still sitting around, how much has already been bonded against, and that kind of thing. And there's different decision-making bodies for really almost every quarter. There's a different group who owns deciding how that gets split out. And so I think there's some good education that we probably all ought to be doing in the next couple of weeks, maybe, and then we can get together and start nailing down where do we think we should go.
Could you scrub Jerry's memo and get it over to us so that we can have the benefit of his experience?
Matt and I are already talking about it.
We already have that, Chris. It's in your, we have our own version as well. It's in your Teams channel.
I want to see Jerry.
Yeah, I think
I'm
we,
just saying in addition.
yeah, we just need to make sure that we're, probably the first step is making sure that we're all on the same baseline of what ground truth is today, just as Steve was describing what we're trying to do with the AMT.
And I think the challenge with that right now, I mean, we are going through the same process, Steve. It's the obvious process, right? We've got to figure out, you know, assets, what gets divided up, how it gets divided up, where we're going to run routes, how they tie into Park City, where Park City ties into Summit County. We're all going to have that discussion, or we're going to have an ineffective transit system. So we've started those discussions. I'm not sure at least in the last discussion that we had a week or so ago, I don't know that we had all the data in place to really be able to fill in all those boxes. And that's kind of where we are right now, is we've got an incomplete data set to really have an intelligent discussion about that. So we're staff, I know staff, your staff, our staff, Matt, Tom, they're all working on trying to add color to all that. And once we have that, then yeah, we're going to be able to start having fuller discussions about it.
Yeah, the reason I just,
a smaller group.
the reason I would just love to kind of keep pushing this is I think this is going to be, again, some of the things of, you know, where does the black line stop and dump off people? We've got brilliant transit people who are going to come to us and say, here's why it should be right here. And by the way, Park City and Summit County both agree. And most of us, I think, will just nod our heads and go, yes. But when we start talking about, gee, we've really been kind of, you know, doing this for the past decade or so with transit, we, at some level, we've kind of glommed all the money together and spent it. You know, the glom was different ways for every little bit of it. But I think we're going to find, just like we got into this Park City, Salt Lake bus thing, the first time we have a meeting, we're going to walk out with 3 times the questions that we had before we walked into it. And it's going to take 3 or 4 meetings before we really start nailing things down as plans, or, you know, plans for plans anyway. And again, there's tens of millions of dollars on the table that we need to resolve how it gets worked out. So it's big and critical.
And still, I mean, even our own route planning, just from what I saw recently in terms of basic suggestions, is still a little bit uncertain. It will offer nobody any comfort, but I can tell you the black line will be south, or will be north of where you and Tim live, and it will be south of the Kimball Junction Transit Center. Beyond that, there's going to be magic in stitching it all together.
Okay. Is that everything for the county operational update?
Just when I stopped sharing, let me get back.
Okay.
We just have a quick ridership update on the other 2 routes, which I probably don't need to share. It's trending back up for both services. I'll just do it quickly here. So down, obviously, year to year, but heading in the right direction. So this is the old 8, what we're now calling the Trailside Loop.
What that big drop on the change on August 24th, was that just people getting used to the change?
Yes. Yes. I would attribute it to that for sure. We kept the same hours of service and the same number of trips, minus 1 or 2, but on a whole, the service was very similar.
There's
Other positive
up there. Sorry, Jamie. That's a normal seasonal drop you'll see every year at that time of year as well.
Thank you, Scott. It's good to hear your voice. We have a lot of increase in app usage, which is positive. So I think to that point, people are becoming more aware and more comfortable with the service. I will say, full disclosure, we're still working with the supervisor to do some operator training, and we do still have, as you saw in your packet, some complaints coming through about observing some of the safety rules. Not a lot, but still even one, we are staying on top of that. So I do want to make a point of that. That is not okay. And same with our circulator routes. It's trending back up after that huge shock last year. It's a really popular service. So we expect in time that we'll get back to some pretty normal levels.
Did that service change any? I mean, the same operator, same vehicles?
For the circulator,
Yeah, between March and July when it arose again.
probably different operators. I think they had to rehire some. They had to do a round of rehiring, but the same provider, the same contractor. The other change was we only had one bus on this route, which made it a 30-minute service until December when we added another bus and it went to 15-minute service.
That's a huge drop. Of course, that March is when the COVID really started to manifest.
Exactly. So we like the trend. I wish the raw numbers were a little more similar a couple years ago, but the trend is good. Okay, any other points on this?
Amy, can you send me that report as well?
Yes,
Thank you.
right now. Thanks all.
Roger,
Yes, ma'am.
it's in your Teams channel,
Oh my God.
but we'll send it to you too.
I'll just say yes.
Oh my God.
Do I
So-
have
Oh
to
my God,
remind-
this is so
Teams too, Roger.
convenient.
do you have to remind you, do I have to remind you of my age?
So just for Chris and Roger's benefit, you know, it's very possible that we would be moving all of our agenda packets, even for council, to Teams in the future, just as a warning.
Okay, that's all right. You can teach these old dogs new tricks, can't you, Roger?
Probably not.
All right, well, we'll discuss it more.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. So yes, as we stated before, the AMT overview will be moved to next month. And then it sounds like we want to do a deeper dive still into the Connect for next month as well. Are there any other agenda items at this time that you're aware of that you'd like to note, or you could certainly send them to me later? Okay. Well, our next meeting is March 16th at 9 a.m. And it looks like we have reached the end of our agenda.
Can I ask, maybe for the March meeting, you know, I think I'm sorry to be kind of myopic on this, but I really think it's the big mystery is the tax piece of this. Caroline was working on one quarter of the tax. There are other quarters that are similarly, in particular, the one that I know that we've been looking through is the one with the capital. I forget the name of that one, but it's the shared one where we're doing our capital expenses. And there was some questions we had about how much of that was spent and what were the commitments, and same kind of thing that Caroline was bringing us for this one. I'll ask, rather than kind of doing one a month and all of a sudden going, oh shit, it's July. Is it reasonable to kind of focus our March meeting less on rider stats and things like that, and get a little bit more focused on maybe adding the other quarters or quarter or something like that to just bring everybody up to speed?
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, well then I will throw that to Caroline and Kim and Sarah and Tom and whatever to figure out what the right set of things is. And I would literally, I know it's starting with the hardest, but if there are ones for which they're pretty straightforward and we kind of know what's happening and everybody agrees and there's no worries, then that comes last. It's the ones where we're kind of going, geez, we really don't have a real clean roadmap of how this has been spent, and it's going to take some hours to put together and get it right and get everybody agreeing. I would focus on whatever those are first, because those will be the hardest, longest.
I think Sarah
Thank
and I
you.
can quickly get together and talk about that and come up with a path forward.
Perfect, thank you.
I've got to say, you know, I've been missing from JTAB for probably three and a half years. I served on it for about 5. You guys are awesome. Thank you. Everybody on this call, everybody's prepared, thoughtful, just a different experience, including subject matter. I mean, before you know, it was a lot lighter in terms of the discussions that we had. So thank you. It's obviously changed a lot and you guys are doing great work. Thank you.
And we've missed you, Roger.
Said
Welcome back.
nobody, said nobody ever.
All right, sounds good for March.
I move adjournment.
Second.
Second. Okay,
Aye.
all in favor and
Aye.
opposed.
Aye.
Adios.
Bye.
Meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.